Welcome to On the Sidelines, the show that usually discusses sports and how sports intersects our lives. However, this series of shows will mostly depart from sports and will center upon an event that is still being discussed long after most sporting events have faded from our memories. Throughout U.S. history, there are dates that are burned into our memories, such as December 7th, 1941, and September 11th, 2001. This year, we commemorate the 60th anniversary of another such date, November 22nd, 1963, the day that the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated. Inspired by the book, Where Were You?, that was compiled and edited by Gus Russo and Harry Moses for the 50th anniversary, I wondered what ordinary U.S. citizens were doing on that ever-so-ordinary Friday before Thanksgiving in 1963 that turned out to be anything but ordinary. For some people, the news of the assassination was received in this manner.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded. Presumably, he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become the 36th President of the United States.
But for many Americans, the news would be heard much differently. On the Sidelines is so grateful to the current residents of Westborough who remember November 22nd, 1963, and who graciously shared their stories with us. Let us listen to their memories of this event. We're pleased to welcome local Westborough historian Kristina Allen. Chris, welcome, and let's go back in history a little bit to November 22nd, 1963, and your thoughts and remembrances.
I was asking quite a lot, Paul, but
You can do it.
Happy to do it. In 1963 in November, when Kennedy was assassinated, I was a sophomore at Middlebury College and living in the chateau, which was, we spoke only French in the chateau. And at noon, we suddenly were told, I think it was by a radio, but there was an announcement throughout campus that Kennedy had been shot. And we couldn't believe it. And everyone started crying. We were young women, and we were involved with all kinds of social movements, and to us, Kennedy was a hope for us. Young, dynamic, we thought he'd do so much for our future as far as women's rights, civil rights, and he just had such promise to him. He was our senator, and then he was our president from Massachusetts. He represented youth as far as we were concerned, and dynamic living. And when he was killed, it was like our future was dashed.
Now,
our hopes were dashed.
Were you in class or a group? How did you all
Well,
of a sudden
because
find
it was
out about this?
It was around noontime, right?
Close,
12:30 or so.
Yeah.
And so we were coming back, I believe, from the cafeteria, essentially. And we got the message, and to tell you the truth, I don't know how, because it spread throughout campus very quickly.
Wildfire, I'm sure, yeah.
And all classes stopped, everything was closed, but there was one television set at the Student Union. And all of us went there, and we were glued, as many people were throughout that day, to the television set of what was happening. after he was dead, he didn't die right away, and it was like the world was in turmoil, and people weren't sure if this was a plot, an international plot against the United States. I guess all planes were stopped, and it had a whole, not only of sadness, but fear as well. But to young people, it meant that our promise and our president was dead. And people were just crying and crying and crying. We spent some of the time at Mead Chapel, kind of like a vigil during the night, evening. And we didn't know what the future would bring. And it certainly was not going to be what we thought would be a bright future. I also will never forget, and it's still in my head, the image of Jackie Kennedy in her pink suit in the back of the limo, cradling JFK's head in her lap, and the blood stains on her skirt. And she, was in almost a trance, but was trying to get her husband to the hospital, and I won't forget that image ever. She also meant a great deal to us because she represented strong, intelligent women, and she had our future in mind too, as far as women's rights, and both of them meant a great deal to the young people, particularly young women at that time. And I will never forget that image.
I think, as you say, they were from Massachusetts.
Yes.
They were us. They were the new hope.
Mm-hmm.
But, for younger people, a new beginning.
Right.
And it was like that new beginning seemed like it was shattered right away. Maybe it
Yes.
wasn't, but you certainly felt a change, or I did, feel
too.
a change.
Yes. And again, Lyndon Johnson came
Right.
afterwards, a very different person. And to people who are young, we had no idea, that he would follow through with what our hopes were that Kennedy represented.
For me, as a young man, he talked different than us. He used to John F. Kennedy, and then this fella had a different accent. It was like, can I get used to him?
Mm-hmm.
But the world changed. You have to adapt.
Sure.
And we learned that. But would it have been the same? I guess we'll never know.
We won't know.
All right, Chris. Okay, go ahead.
Also, it was the first assassination in my life.
Right.
And that was something that was so new and different. After that came assassinating Martin Luther King, assassinating Bobby Kennedy, and now assassinations in different places and different times. But assassination of John Kennedy was the first time in our lives our leader had been killed. And that was unheard of, not only, in general, but the fact that he had been killed.
Well, I personally thought assassinations were like old history. We were
Lincoln
past that.
or
We were
something.
past that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, at that time we weren't. And little did we know, as you said, there's going to be a couple more, right? Soon thereafter.
Yeah.
Lessons to be learned.
Different world it became.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you again, Chris, for coming
welcome.
in and your thoughts on November 22nd, 1963.
And we won't forget it. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. We're happy to have with us Bob Brown to give us his thoughts and memories of November 22nd, 1963, and John F. Kennedy. Bob, what do you remember?
All right, let me just begin. The reason that I was involved in this at all was that they were giving books to the library, and I was taking books from here down to Scarsdale High School.
From Westborough
Yeah.
to Scarsdale, New York.
Scarsdale, New York.
Yeah?
And so my interest in the topic is that I was on the road when it happened. And so it was interesting car radio was all you had. And so you didn't pick up much except as you got flashes of on the radio. But nobody else knew any more than I did. The guys in the toll booth say, why, do you know why these people are looking so glum? And I said, the president was shot. You're kidding. I thought the guys would pass out in the toll booths and just...
You think somebody would have told them before you? You were the bearer of the news.
Well, we were getting it all about almost simultaneously.
Yeah, right, so yeah.
So it was just a mayhem in terms of just conflicting stories about what was going on and who was there and where was this taking place and how were people doing now. And it was fascinating watching the culture of the world at that particular point. Everybody was just involved in going different places and doing all the things that we're doing on the turnpike. And when they were getting glimpses of tragedy, you could see it in the people's eyes at various toll booths and toll takers who knew nothing about it. Just nobody knew anything about it. You were hearing it live, and you didn't know anything about it either, other than the president was shot.
So they were just, everybody was getting a piecemeal as you went along. Now, were you headed to New York? Or were
Yeah,
you
I was heading to New York.
You headed to New York.
Yeah.
So any thoughts and memories when you got to New York? I mean, that's...
They knew nothing about it.
Really?
Nobody knew anything about it. And I said, I'm glad I got this here in time. I was bringing books to them.
Yeah.
And they said, why the urgency? I said, the president was shot and killed. You're kidding. They just practically would pass out just from the news. I'm bearing this news to people.
Well, it's shocking news.
Oh,
It
geez,
isn't like we had a sunny day.
That's right. So I think I got to get home. Be with my mother. She's up in Massachusetts now, and this will scare the crap out of her. So I got to get back up there. So I hustled to get out, do what I had to do, deliver the books, and say thank you, see you, bye. And as I went up the road, the whole climate changed. There were people who hadn't heard about anything. They were just listening to the radio, listening to music, and you could tell they were just totally out of touch of what the events,
was going on,
what the events were that day. And as you begin to tell people, they just mouths would just drop open and didn't know what to say. You're kidding. You're kidding. You're not pulling my leg down, man. I said, no. If I'm pulling your leg, it's because my leg was pulled. I can't. I have no proof other than what I'm told.
Right.
So I said, well, this is the best we can do. And it was just to watch the people's expressions and the language that came out, and then getting back on the road and going back against the traffic. That didn't have anything to do with it, but I was going back up to Massachusetts and watching the cars coming down, and there would be, every once in a while, there'd be just a flurry of people that were normally gabbing all the time.
Yeah.
Total silence.
Yeah.
Nothing. Nobody would say anything. And then occasionally you'd run across people who hadn't heard anything about it. And you tell them, they said, cut, that's not, you're kidding. Yeah. I said, I'm not kidding. I can't prove it, but that's what I'm hearing on my radio. Turn your radio on and listen.
And a lot of people then didn't have a car radio.
That's right.
You know, it wasn't a God-given right to have a radio in your car back then. So many of those people probably had no idea.
You're probably right. I haven't thought about that, but it certainly shocked a lot of people. But to watch the tenor of the traffic, too, was fascinating. Everybody's going crazy, going back up, blowing horns and blowing each other off the road as they always did. And all of a sudden, it all kind of quieted down. You didn't hear any horns, heard nothing. Lights would flash like, have you heard, you know? And it was the bedlam going down and silence coming back. And then when I got back up here, my mother had heard about it, but she didn't know what to make of it. And she said, what do we do? I said, the best thing that we can do is go down and let's ring the bell at the church. So we went down and nobody heard down there. I said, we want to bring the bell, bring people's attention to what's going on. And, well, do you know how to do it? I said, I know how to do it. So I did it, and gradually people would filter back into the church. What's the bell going on for? What are you ringing that for? Because there was no way of announcing it, other than just by word of mouth. They came in. And gradually and watching them out of the window of the church as the traffic just went, it was visible.
Yeah, the whole day just changed. Yeah.
Everything slowed down. So it was a day to remember in the sense that it was tragic. But it's fascinating how we as people took to it. We didn't know what to do.
Well, we had never lived through something like that.
Yeah. People say, how did you know to ring the bell? I said, no, I don't know why I wanted to ring the bell. I just felt that was the only appropriate thing I could do at this particular point, was ring the bell and let people ask, why's the bell ringing? And tell them.
You just do what you have to do,
Yeah.
and you did it.
I just did it. That was a tough day. Then you start worrying about kids if they're away at school and what are they hearing and what's going on. And so it was not a day that ended at 6 o'clock. It went well into the night.
Oh, yeah, and then the whole weekend was,
Oh, yeah.
Other things happened.
So that's, my story really is just being astounded at the way people were hearing it on radios, both in our direction and not. Those who didn't have radios, who hadn't heard, those who had radios and still hadn't heard, and just watch the whole tenor of the climate. When you get pockets of trucks, they seem to have the knowledge that it was something wrong, and you could see them slowing down and telling stories at the toll booth that they weren't sure was right or not.
Right, and you can't tell stories at a toll booth anymore. Those are gone, so there's no more word about there.
That's right. Well,
Yeah.
But I forget how it translated into the news, except that it was just bulletins after bulletins, but nobody having a lot of facts.
Right.
Just the president was shot. Is he dead? Yeah, we think he is. That kind of battering back and forth. The truckers were the ones that just seemed to know most.
Well, they probably had the two-way radios, yeah.
They just, you could see the whole slowing right down. They just were taking their time and no more cutting in and out of traffic. Just take your time, take your time. It was fascinating.
Well, Bob, we're glad you made it to New York, and more importantly, that you made it back
Well, I'm
here.
glad I got
to tell
back.
these stories.
I'm glad I got back, and I appreciate what you're doing today. This is something that shouldn't be forgotten.
Yeah.
We've got to let our kids know about it, and let the whole world knows that we know what went on that day, and what a tragic day it was for this country.
Okay, Bob, well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Paul. It was good to be with you.
Okay, thanks. We welcome Bob Vallee, longtime dentist in Westborough. But back in November of '63, let's find out what Bob was up to. Bob?
Well, it was a memorable day because as a dental student, I was in my third year
Now, where was this, Bob?
at Tufts.
At Tufts University, right here, yeah?
And the first 2 years in dental school, you work on models and mannequins. They never let you touch a real human being.
So, with like false teeth?
Yeah, models, just a mold of teeth.
Yeah.
And you do your fillings and whatever procedure you need to do on a model. So this was in November of '63. I was working on my first live patient.
So they would get, people to volunteer to come in? Or they were,
in those days,
program?
In those days, it was mainly welfare patients.
Right,
It was before dental insurance was in line. So we had a large supply of patients. Unfortunately, not so anymore in the dental schools.
Right, yeah.
Most dentists now, graduating from Tufts at least, they don't necessarily have their own patient. They share a patient. Maybe 3 or 4 students to a patient, because most people have insurance.
Insurance now, yeah.
So it's a big change. But they do have magnificent clinics with mannequins that very closely simulate a human being. Pretty interesting stuff.
So this is what you were doing. You were working on.
So I had just finished my first 2 fillings on a live patient. It was the upper right, first and second bicuspid. I did occlusal amalgam fillings. It was on a young Hispanic woman I forget if she was from Chelsea or from Charlestown, but it was either one of those C's. And I had just finished the restorations and was dismissing her, and there was an announcement over the dental clinic loudspeaker system, and it stated that President Kennedy had been shot. And this was a point in time when the president was hanging around with Frank Sinatra and Marilyn Monroe fiasco.
The Rat Pack, yeah.
And, Peter Lawford was his brother-in-law.
Right.
Yeah. And there was some mafia guys connected in there. And we started joking, it must have been a mob hit. And so we thought it was a joke. And then the word got around to the person that does the announcements that everyone thought it was a joke. And she very quickly said, no, this is for real. It's not a joke. And the president has been shot down in Dallas, Texas. So that's where I was.
So did you have another patient coming in? It was like,
No,
game time now? Or?
That was, when you dental clinic work is very, very slow. That was my patient for the day.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's lucky if you get one. A lot of times they don't show up.
Right.
In those days, it was illegal for them to have a telephone. Of course, most of them did, but it was illegal.
Oh, so
The
you
honest
couldn't
ones did
contact
not
them.
have a telephone,
Yeah.
so you couldn't call them to confirm the appointment. So, but this woman was a good patient, and she showed up for all the appointments. So that was my recollection of the date, the
Yeah.
big day.
And that weekend, whatever plans you had, it was all changed.
Yeah. Of course, those were the days also where there was a lot of rumblings about the Vietnam conflict, and a lot of the students were activists. A lot of them were younger guys. I had been in the service first. I was a Korean veteran. And so I didn't think much of what was going on in Vietnam. It was just the things that the United States was doing all the time. We were always in a war.
Somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, and an interesting thing is that my daughter had given me a book probably about 5 years ago. It was 3 days in January, and it was a book about Eisenhower and his relationship with JFK. And Eisenhower was a very, very thoughtful man, and he was a good writer. And he had speech writers, but he would get every speech ahead of time, and he would edit the speeches. He did not anyone telling him what to say. And actually, he was working with MacArthur at the beginning of World War II, and he wrote the speeches for MacArthur. So anyways, I'm getting away from the Kennedy relationship. He was very concerned that Kennedy was going to get led astray by the military-industrial complex, and he spent a lot of time with Kennedy to advise him and to kind of coach him on what would be coming, because Vietnam wasn't officially started yet, but it was started, but we were there, but we weren't there. And he knew it was coming, and that's why he was so concerned about the military-industrial complex. And he spent a lot of time with Kennedy.
So what you're telling me is that we had a Republican ex-president helping a Democrat president.
Exactly.
But it seems something.
Times have changed.
Times have changed. So certainly changed.
Well, the thing is that when you think back, one of the things that Kennedy said that was very revealing to my mind is that statement that he made. He says, think not what your country can do for you,
Right.
but what you can do for your country.
Right.
Totally flipped upside down today. That's not the way we think.
No.
The way the
Right.
country
But there were
thinks.
certainly different times.
Yeah. And so it was natural for a Republican to want the Democratic president to do the best thing for the country.
For the country.
Exactly. That was the key.
All right. Well, we thank you for your memories.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob.
Such as they are. Some of them are fleeting, and some of them are fading.
We know.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Welcome to On the Sidelines. We have the former editor of the Worcester Telegram and Gazette, Harry Whitin, and a career in education, Dominic Pisa, and a couple of my golf buddies at Westborough Country Club. Gentlemen, welcome to On the Sidelines, our
Thanks.
special edition.
Thank you for inviting.
Well, we're going to go back now to 1963, what your lives were, and then, I don't know, you probably weren't the editor then, Harry, but,
No.
but what was going on in your life in 63, and particularly where were you in November of 63, and we'll get to that specific date, the 22nd.
Okay, in November of 1963, I was a freshman in college in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania. And I came from a small town in Ware, Massachusetts. And I thought I was hit the big time, the big city. So what does a kid do? He immediately starts cutting class and exposing himself to the city's culture.
Oh, you learned the ropes quick, yeah.
I cut a class and I went to a movie. I wish I could remember the name of the movie, but I was in a movie theater on November 22nd.
This is on the Friday, that Friday, yeah.
The afternoon of November 22nd. I know that I cut calculus because I had a little trouble with that course.
So what happened?
Nothing happened in the theater. It was an afternoon thing. When I came out of the theater, the city had changed. It was unbelievable. You could tell something was going on, and there were people around. There were people on the sidewalk, kind of talking in hushed terms. And all of a sudden, a guy came by with a stack of newspapers, and he's saying, "President shot, President shot." And I bought a newspaper, and from then on, for like the next 2 hours, I just wandered the streets of downtown Philadelphia buying every newspaper I could. They were putting out extras. Philadelphia had 3 newspapers, the Bulletin, the Daily News, and the Inquirer. All of them were on the street. Every time a truck came up with papers, there'd be dozens of people around just buying them right off the back of the truck. And so I was learning about the whole thing and learned that he was dead within an hour. It was a mind-blowing experience.
So in those days, of course, the newspaper, they had different editions. So probably the
Right.
first edition may have just said President shot, I suppose. And then it took a while maybe till they found out he had passed.
In those days, the Daily News published all day long, sort of like the Record American
I
in
see, yeah.
Boston. The Bulletin published in the morning and the Inquirer in the afternoon, or vice versa. I can't remember which was which. So the morning paper came out with an extra, the afternoon paper came out with an extra, and the Daily News just came out with a screamer.
Now you were in the newspaper business. I don't know if I remember this correctly, but it used to be, there were headlines, and depending upon the severity of the headline, the print was larger or not. Is that
yes.
true?
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
Huge. It was the end of the world type.
For this one?
For this one, yeah. And in those days, the New York Times, which I didn't get till the next morning, but the New York Times never used the giant type, and the New York Times had a 3-line headline, so it was like half of the top of the page was lots of headlines. So yeah, it was a big story, and in many ways, I think I got so fascinated by these editions coming out one right after another. I think that's one of the things that got me into the newspaper business.
And out of calculus.
And out of calculus, you bet.
Well, Dominic, you were a teacher, but I don't know if you were teaching then or what was going on in your life at that particular time.
Well, I was a senior doing a practicum at Whitin High School
You
in science.
were a senior in high school?
No, I was a senior in college.
Oh, you were senior in college. I'm sorry, yeah.
in 1963, and I was doing my practicum in science teaching
I
at
see.
Whitin High School. And that morning, all of a sudden, there was commotion, basically. That's one of the words I can think of, and wondering what was going on, and the word that Kennedy was shot. And eventually, as you had mentioned, the word that he had passed away shortly after, and there was just a sadness that can't be described, Paul. And it because Clinton, as I was telling you earlier, it has a proud history. It's a divergent community. And it's a good community, a very good community, and it's rich in politics. There's a lot of history to it. I was telling you about David I. Walsh was the first Irish Catholic governor of Massachusetts. So
And he came from Clinton.
and he came from
I see,
Clinton.
yeah.
Yeah, he graduated from Clinton High School, where I was practice teaching.
No, but he wasn't in your era. When was he the governor?
1914.
1940, a little before you.
Just a little. Yeah, and I was also mentioning it's very Catholic, very democratic, and there's a large number of Irish people. So there was a sadness probably as strong as any community could have.
Okay, yeah, Clinton, I think, is known as somewhat then Irish Catholic.
Yes.
And of course, we have John Kennedy.
Yes.
Where Massachusetts? I know where it is, but I don't know much about the demographics. Would it have been a Kennedy stronghold, or?
Yes.
It would have been.
Yes, definitely. And Ware was a small, self-contained industrial community. A lot of there were shoe mills, textile mills. So Ware was definitely a Kennedy town. I recall in the election of 1960 that there was a big deal over bubblegum cigars for your candidate. And down at the Ware River News, like a newsstand store, they were always sold out of the Kennedy bubblegum cigars and had a gazillion Nixon bubblegum cigars.
They probably still have them.
They probably do. So Ware was definitely a democratic community, and it was such a big deal to have the president come from Massachusetts. I mean, that was an extraordinary thing.
Well, I think especially for people our age.
Yeah.
The president never came from around here. We had John Quincy Adams a few years before us, a lot of years, but not Kennedy.
And in those days, unlike today, the president had just almost unmatched respect. You respected the president, no matter whether he was a Republican or a Democrat. Today, it's just bang, 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 hate, hate, hate. But, once Kennedy got elected, he was the president. And I think that's why the world seems so sad when the president gets taken down, taken out of the picture. It was a profoundly sad time.
Yeah, the level of respect is gone.
Well, I think not only here, but in the world when Kennedy passed. It just, especially Ireland, other parts of the world.
Well, in my case, I was just 20, and I could relate. He was young, he was charismatic. The things that his goals, his hopes, justice, equality, things of that nature, I could relate to very much.
Yeah, and that weekend, just whatever you were doing that weekend, you may have been coming home for Thanksgiving, you were there, but it changed everything for that week.
Oh, it did. It did. I actually didn't go home for Thanksgiving, but I can't recall a time in my life when you sort of skipped meals. You just were glued to the TV. Never forget the caisson and the funeral.
Right.
You know, we had
John Jr., Caroline, absolutely. Yeah.
classes canceled.
What was it, a salute that was made?
Oh yeah, it was.
Oh, yeah.
That was history in the making. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
we didn't realize how much it was, but we were, I think, for the first time glued to a TV. For it was news in the making.
Yeah.
You know, and we lived it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one of the quotes that Lincoln made, because the Profiles in Courage book, if I could, I'd put Kennedy in there. But Lincoln had a quote, it's not the years in your life, but it's the life in your years. And I think Kennedy did a lot in his short life.
Oh, he certainly did in that short period.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you very much for reminiscing. Thanks for coming on the sideline.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
On a personal note, I was a senior at St. John's High School in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. November 22nd, 1963 was the Friday before Thanksgiving. My fellow students and I were attending a pep rally in the gymnasium for the annual Thanksgiving Day football game to be played the following week. We came out of the gymnasium into the sunshine of a beautiful fall day, ready to go home and enjoy a great weekend. But then we heard the news on the car radio and knew the weekend would be vastly different. A weekend of watching television and seeing history unfolding before our eyes awaited us. But of all the memories from that time, there is one that I remember the most. It occurred 1 or 2 weeks later in trigonometry class. Our teacher, Brother Dunstan, closed the classroom door and was not talking trigonometry. He started by saying something that startled me somewhat as he disclosed that he did not vote for John F. Kennedy. He voted for the other candidate, Richard Milhous Nixon. Well, how could that be? Didn't everyone in Massachusetts vote for Kennedy? But he startled me even more by saying that he voted for the wrong person. John F. Kennedy was the man for those times, and he gave his reasons. How many times have we seen someone flip-flop their view in order to go along with public opinion? But the lesson learned was that as one goes along in life, they may validly view issues in a different way. Westborough remembers November 22nd, 1963, a day that will live in infamy, just like December 7th, 1941. Is there a link between the two dates? Let's take a look. On the weekend of November 22nd, 1963, the Washington Redskins played the Philadelphia Eagles in a National Football League game. On December 7th, 1941, the Washington Redskins played the Philadelphia Eagles in a National Football League game at Griffith Stadium in Washington, D.C. The events of Pearl Harbor were filtering into the press box on that December 7th, 1941 game day, but no announcement was made to the crowd pertaining to the attack. Instead, constant announcements were made over the public address system, ordering military officers and government officials to report to their duty stations. According to Chapter 3 by Lewis Blandon in the book A Palace in the Nation's Capital, Griffith Stadium, there was in the crowd a young naval officer candidate by the name of John F. Kennedy. He answered his country's call that day and for many days and years thereafter. I hope that you have enjoyed listening to the memories of Westborough residents concerning that day, November 22nd, 1963. And again, thanks to all who shared their stories. As usual, this is Paul McGrath saying thanks for watching, and I hope to see you at the game. And if you are not playing in the game, I hope to see you on the sidelines.